editorialist cunoscut pe toate continentele, este vorba de un autor de filme documentare care pot fi găsite și editorialistul din Suedia, Jan Myrdan. Mr. Jan Myrdan, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Your Excellency Igor Dodon, President of the Republic of Moldova, the Joint Committee of the Chisinau Forum, respected participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful for the invitation to speak here, as I agree with the organizers, both that an open and rational exchange of views is necessary, and that once liberating ideas can harden and change to ideologies, false consciousness. Or to put it more plainly, like many of us in Europe, I can see much of my own political roots among those to the left in the French National Assembly, 1789. But at the same time, I know that individuals and organizations labeling themselves left in Europe today, as during the 19th century, and then in different ways during the 20th century, have been politically responsible for imperialist and colonial wars. Phrases as the left obfuscate the issues. Instead, we have to seek truth from facts. That Mao Zedong used those words in 1938 should not disturb anyone, as they go back to the rational core of classical thought, both in Chinese and Western tradition. I will take 4 different examples. The refugee crisis, that is the mass migration to Europe from Afghanistan, West Africa, West Asia and Africa, is creating a serious and threatening major social problems and conflicts here in Europe. But it is not the result of any act of God, as earthquakes or a climatic catastrophe. I know this well. 60 years ago, I moved to Kabul, Afghanistan. It was a poor, tribal, feudal country that, by being fiercely independent, had managed to survive the Great Game in the 19th century. My wife and I traveled all over the country. We were young and poor, but as we were polite and unarmed, we were protected by the Pashtun Valley, also when we stayed with the Black Tent nomads. They moved from the high mountain pastures to the lowlands in autumn, but there were no Afghan refugees fleeing the country. I wrote a book to make Afghanistan better understood in all countries. It was published in many languages, also in Romanian. We all know what then happened. Now NATO is continuing its illegal war against the Afghan people for economic and political control of Central Asia. Even officially neutral Sweden is taking part with troops. Fleeing Afghans can now be seen begging in Stockholm. As Chaucer put it in 1390, the chickens come home to roost. This is not a humanitarian crisis. It has to be handled and seen as an international political crime. My second example is different. I'm from a country in Europe that has not experienced war for more than 200 years. That we have been spared is not only due to some kind of historical luck. but also partly to a specific tradition in our foreign policy. Ever since Sweden and Russia were being shaped as nations in Northern Europe, there were wars between us. For 800 years, those wars created great suffering. Also in this part of Europe, the troops of Charles XII were waging war. Finally, in 1809, Sweden was militarily so utterly defeated that it lost the eastern part of the national territory. At that time, there was neither Finland nor Sweden. It was one rather poor peasant country where the languages were mixed. Finnish was spoken not only in Stockholm, but among ancestors of mine, the forest Finns of Dalekarlia. Finland, as a nation, took shape during the Russian occupation in the 19th century. In Sweden, the utterly incompetent king was overthrown, and the French Napoleonic Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte was called in as a crown prince. He had been a revolutionary who became an extremely pragmatic realpolitiker. The Dictionnaire de Girouette, published in Paris during the 100 Days of Napoleon in 1815, pointed out that Bernadotte had sworn 10 different oaths of fidelity and broken them one after the other during the circumstances. But he saw what the Swedish politicians had been unable to understand. The 800 years of war were pointless. Russia could be weak or be strong, but it existed and was larger. He immediately took contact with the Russian Tsar, and without any regard for Swedish sentiments, he changed the Swedish policy for good. I'm not going in on his whole history, even though it is fascinating. He was not able to gain the French throne he was aspiring to, but he managed to maneuver, and despite the Holy Alliance and political legitimism, he survived as a monarch. In Sweden, he is known for his struggle against the freedom of expression. But in 1834, he formulated the foreign policy principles that became known as the Bernadotte policy. Sweden was a small country, encircled by the great powers to the east, south, and west. It could survive only by suppleness, but still keeping its vital interests. A principled realpolitik, you could say. My third example is a personal one from the last war. In July 1940, my father, Gunnar Myrdan, was going back to the United States to finish his study of the Negro question that 1954 became of central value to the Supreme Court in its decision of desegregation. He needed a German visa to be able to go to Portugal. You know, we were surrounded by German troops on all sides. We're going to reach the ships for the United States. He was at that time both an academic and a prominent Swedish politician. As an anti-fascist, he had been blacklisted by the German government, and now Sweden was in principle surrounded by German troops. A representative of the German legation, it was not an embassy at that time, came out to us. I remember it very well. The German diplomat said, "We are a broad-minded people. We let bygones be bygones. We are now building the great European house. We will let Sweden leave its small cottage and enter the great house and take its rightful European place. But my father said, we Swedes prefer our own small cottage, one that we could manage ourselves. Of course, he did not get a visa and had to go over Russia and Japan to the United States. But he kept his opinion of the small cottage, even to his end, when many important people were working to get Sweden to enter what was becoming a new big European house, the European Union, without the self-determination that Swedes could have in their own little cottage. My fourth example is a little different. It concerns meetings and conferences like this one. During the decades, I've taken part in many. Take the one we had 10 years ago in the Palais Bourbon, Assemblée Nationale in Paris, on Justice Internationale et Impunité des cas des États-Unis. It gathered a very wide spectrum of intellectuals and public figures for intellectually honest and rational debate on the extra-legal behavior of the United States and how to safeguard the rights that the people in different countries have gained the last centuries. My paper used the arguments of Hermann Göring during the Nuremberg trial to clarify the reasoning of politicians like Bush and Blair. It is true that official media and serving academics in every crisis can beat the drums of war and spread unreason. In 2005, I myself had the rather large exhibition with a well-documented catalogue for our Royal Library on this subject. But in the long run, it is the rational and reasoned arguments in conferences like this that prevail. That is, dear colleagues, at least what I, in my 91st year, have been able to see during my life.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myrdan.